Hello everyone, I'm CrypticFox, and today we're looking at the first 10 cycles in Oxygen Not Included, and how to go about stabilizing your colony for the rest of the game. The first choice you make that can impact the stability of your colony when you're first starting out is the choice of the first 3 duplicants you're going to have joining your team. Now, each duplicant has a different way that they're going to respond to stress once they get really upset. There's really 2 different types right now in the alpha, but that's supposed to be increased, and they'll have some other different options. In the case of Vomiter, when the duplicant gets really stressed, they're going to start throwing up everywhere, which is kind of a mess to clean up. But some people have found some little tricks to make use of the vomit in a good way. And also, it seems to be less destructive than the destructive option, where when they get really stressed, they're going to run over to a piece of machinery and break it on you, requiring you to spend additional time fixing it. Both of them consume extra time. However, the destructive option also leaves you without the use of that machine, so oftentimes it's best to try to pick people that are a vomiter when you're starting out, so that you have an option as you get to learn the game where they're not going to do a ton of damage. The traits are something else that you're going to want to look at very carefully. Diver's Lungs is generally considered to be one of the best options, simply because the duplicant will consume less oxygen, and oxygen is one of the supplies that you have to try to manage most closely. This is particularly true as you're just moving past those first starting stages where the oxygen is supplied for you. Quick Learner can also be a helpful trait as you're starting to learn your research, because it'll give you an opportunity to kind of dig through and research the items quickly. Mole Hands is another good trait, simply because it gives you the option to dig a little bit faster, and that's what you spend a lot of time doing early in the game. Be careful of the traits that you choose as your negative trait. In the case of Narcoleptic, this character will fall asleep. Irritable Bowel will cause them to go to the bathroom more often, and Yokel means that this person can't be used for research. But there are other traits that could be more detrimental for your team. For example, a mouth breather will consume more oxygen, and somebody who's a loud sleeper will irritate the other duplicants and cause their stress level to rise more quickly. Note that the traits that you're selecting in here, if it has a green positive trait, it's something that they get a benefit to. However, they can still do the task even if they don't have any actual points listed in it. If it's at a 0, they can still do the task. If it's a negative number, then they're going to do the task more poorly. Your duplicate team's arrived in the middle of the planet, and where do you go from here? The only real thing you can do to start off the game is to dig, so that's naturally step number 1. Take a look at your surroundings to get a sense of what kind of resources you have around you. Each of the worlds is procedurally generated, so each time you play the game is going to be a little bit different. In this case, you can see I have algae that's placed above me. I have some oxygen pockets and some vacuums to the right of me. Down below, I have some copper, which is going to be used to create some machinery. We have 2 pockets of water that are relatively close by. Bear that in mind as you start to do your expansion. It's not super important when you start out, but you do want to know where the resources are, so you know where you have to kind of work towards to get them. In this case, I'm going to move towards the left, and we'll start by digging out an area over here that can produce a little bit of space and give us access to that water. Be careful you don't destroy any oxalite crystals that you start with. Despite the name of the game, oxygen is included for the very beginning of the game, as is food in your ration box, although you start off with 20,000 kilocalories. Once you've expanded out an area that you want to work with, this provides a good foundation for beginning the play. So, by expanding to the left and right, you've added some space within your base, but you've also caused the oxygen to spread out, so your concentration of oxygen is not going to be quite as high. However, you've probably exposed some more oxalite, as I have in this case, and that should keep your duplicants well supplied with oxygen initially, so oxygen is not your first concern. Neither is food, because they provided you with 20,000 kilocalories. Really, the very first thing you need to worry about with your colony is going to the bathroom. Although it's possible for your duplicants to breathe the contaminated oxygen, and it doesn't have any real negative effect in the game at the moment, this is still the alpha, and at some point that probably is going to be an issue where they're not going to be allowed to breathe the contaminated oxygen, especially since the tooltip on it says it's not breathable, even though you technically can do it right now. So you want to try to keep your bathroom facilities relatively separated from your base. In order to move up and down between different levels, you're going to need to build some sort of a ladder system so that your team can move around. Be careful again that you don't dig up any of the oxalite crystal while you're working. In this case, I'm going to set my team up to gather all these plants that are here, and we're going to build our bathroom facilities on the extreme right. Once you have your place identified, then you want to try, it's a good idea to try to put down some tiling, not only because it provides a good stable surface for you to work with, but it's also better for the decor rating of the duplicants in the area. Having a higher decor rating will help to keep stress low. Initially, stress won't be a big problem, even though the duplicants are going to be sleeping on the floor because they don't have a cot yet. But it is something you need to be aware of as you move progressively through the game. And usually having some sort of tile flooring is your best option to work with in terms of having that stability. So the first order of business is to give your duplicants a place to do their business. So in your plumbing section, you want to get your outhouse and place that somewhere over on the extreme side that you've now gained access to. Generally, I leave a little bit of space because once I do research, I'm going to have a place here to do composting. Given you're going to be adding a number of duplicates early on, it's best usually to build 2 outhouses so that you don't have to worry about anyone having to wait to use the bathroom, which can cause them to have a mess on the floor. Once your bathroom is in place, research is going to be one of your first priorities because it gives you access to a couple of different options. So what you need to do is build a power supply in the form of a manual generator, which can be used by a duplicant. In your stations option, you're also going to select research station and build that somewhere nearby. You'll also need to connect your power generation to the station in order for it to work. I generally run these cables through the floor just to avoid having the mess of wires all over the base. Also, I think it helps a little bit with the decor, though I'm not entirely positive of that. Now that your research station is built and it's connected to a power supply, you'll need to choose the research you want to work on. So if you go in and select research, your first priority should really be the farming tech. This will give you access both to the algae terrarium, which lets you scrub carbon dioxide out of the air, as well as the compost that will let you take the contaminated dirt from the outhouse and store it someplace away from the rest of your colony and help convert it into fertilizer, which neutralizes it and stops it from producing contaminated oxygen. But also you want to get access to the planter box, which lets you skip the micro musher and not have to use it. If you can get enough plants growing in your planter box, then you can make a self-sustaining food supply that doesn't require the consumption of water the way the micro musher does. You may have to use that musher initially in the early portion of the game in order to supplement the food supply you start with. However, the sooner you can move to self-sustaining plants, the better. With the research selected, you'll need to go in and select novice research as an item to produce, and then the easiest way to do it is just to set continuously fabricate novice research if resources are available. You only need to add really one of them, and then that way, as long as there's something to be researched and you have a supply of power, someone will continue to work on the research station and advance your learning. While they're busy working on the research, it's a good idea to set up some storage so that you have a place to store the materials that you're gathering within the base. You'll probably need a few of these to start. Certainly they can be, you can increase the volume of them as you move along. This research actually requires the consumption of dirt, although it doesn't say so within the research station itself. When you choose the research items, it'll show you it requires 100 kilograms of dirt as a portion of the research. If you have someone who has a high research skill, you can go into the jobs and try to set it so that they're the only person who works on the research. So in this case, Cecil is the one who has the highest research. So I want him working on these research items so that it will improve the speed at which we research things. So I'm going to deselect Bubbles from working on research, and that way it'll be Cecil that focuses on it. We can make best use of his learning ability. Once your lockers are constructed for storage, you'll need to activate them so you can tell them what to store. Initially, you can select all, but then you want to go into your organic and ensure that you're not storing contaminated dirt within these storage containers. The contaminated dirt emits contaminated oxygen, and if you have that material stored in these bins, you'll get contaminated oxygen wherever you have these bins stored. Later, once you get access to an area that has slime, you'll want to do the same thing, and in the organic section, ensure that slime is not selected so that you're not storing slime in these containers, unless you have them placed someplace that you can scrub the contaminated oxygen away from them, or you're making use of the contaminated oxygen in some other way. Initially, when I start my base, I'd like to keep the area that they're working in relatively small so that we can ensure that we have a good supply of oxygen. If you look at the oxygen overlay, you can see that there's a very strong concentration of oxygen throughout the base. The more we expand by cutting into new areas, the more this oxygen has to spread out. So early on, if you can complete some research quickly, that'll give you a leg up when you start to expand out and need to build other items. We've just completed our research for the farming technology, which is fantastic. So now there's a couple of things we want to prioritize. We still want to continue doing research, and we should have another duplicate coming soon in 18 seconds. So we're going to go in and select research again. Now it's really, there's a question of what you could build next. You could go with power regulation so that you can start storing power, but you can already make small batteries, so that may not necessarily be your first priority. Liquid piping can come in handy as you're advancing, as well as gas piping, but the pieces that I'm really generally looking for are the sanitation sciences. This will give you access to things like showers, airlock doors, lavatories, and also the air deodorizer, which can be very important in the near future. So we're going to start first with the liquid piping. Now that we have access to those farming resources, we also want to build a couple of other items here to take advantage. We're going to use the compost and build it next to our outhouse. This keeps the entire the entirety of this process separated from the rest of the base, so we don't get those contaminated materials. And now anything that comes out of the outhouse when they clean it will go into the compost bin. This is still going to produce contaminated oxygen, but we do have it at least trapped as far away from where the largest portion of our activity is. We're also going to want to dig out a new area here that we can use for some sort of farming. So we'll dig into this space and lay out new tile for the flooring in here. Now, the tile that it's going to default to always seems to be the one that's on the far left. In this case, it's defaulted to igneous rock. But I don't have as much igneous rock as I do sandstone, so I might as well use the sandstone, which also gives a plus to the decor, so you can help reduce the stress of your duplicants as you build. I generally like to make the floors four tiles high so that you have room to build items in here, and then you can also conceivably put in other items like artwork to try and maintain a decent level of decor. Our next duplicant is available, and we're now on cycle 3, so we're going to select a duplicant option. With our new duplicant options, we don't have the ability to shuffle them to get the ideal scenario, so we're going to have to just look through what choices we have available. We have Ralph, who's a quick learning with a 5 learning, and he's a narcoleptic, which means he's going to fall asleep periodically. Woodrow is uncultured, and that means that he's going to have a lower decor expectation, so he's less likely to get stressful, but he's also anemic, so he's going to move more slowly around the base, and he also won't participate very well in athletic activities, such as running on the treadmill. Last, we have Eleanor, who's a chef, who's amphibious, so she can move more quickly underwater. She digs quickly, but she's also a slow learner, and as a biohazard, she gets sick a lot. Out of this set of choices, I think I'm most likely to choose the narcoleptic, because his occasionally falling asleep isn't that big of an issue, and his decor expectation is only a 10. Granted, a negative 40 decor expectation would help Woodrow get less stressed, but I'm not really a fan of the anemic trait. At this point, it's cycle 3, and I've managed to keep my consumption of algae to basically nothing. We've collected some of it. As you can see, I have... In the organics, we have 419 kilograms, so we have a very small sample of it. However, I've not had to do any kind of oxygen production. As we get more duplicants in here, they're going to produce more CO2, and that's going to result in us having to use the algae terrarium to scrub it out. Until this point, we've just been content to let our duplicants sleep on the floor, but they don't really get the most restful sleep, and when they're not really well rested, they can often start to build up stress. Right now, they're just tired, so they're just sleeping, but at some point they're going to get a debuff on them that will say that they have a sore back because they've been sleeping on the hard ground. So to combat that, we'll need to install some cots that will give them a living space they can live in and work a little more comfortably so it doesn't impact their stress level. So we're going to have one cot ultimately assigned to every duplicant as you work through the base, but what you want to do is try to position your living quarters in an area of the base that's higher up, because oxygen tends to move more upward, and carbon dioxide will tend to move downward. So we're going to build a space at the top here that accommodates some living quarters for them so we can put in enough beds for everyone to have their own cot, and then they'll be able to live and sleep a little bit more comfortably, and that'll help overall with their total stress level. Our liquid piping research is complete, so that has given us the access to pumps and pipes and that sort of thing. So now we're going to go on and choose our next level of research. Moving on to the intermediate level, this type of research requires both the basic research, which is at the top part, and then also intermediate research in order to complete it. So to get the sanitary sciences here available, we're going to need to set up a supercomputer that will give us the ability to start to do research within that space. So again, under your stations, there's going to be the supercomputer we'll install here, hook it up to power, and when it's ready, we can start that second level of research. Our supercomputer's been all built and we have power, so now we're going to select the research in here the same way as we did for the research station by choosing intermediate research, and then we'll just choose continuously complete work, or complete research, as long as there's enough resources. So the two stations will work in tandem in order to complete those intermediary levels. The supercomputer, however, does also require water. Now, unfortunately, we built our base close to this water supply, and when we first extended out, we headed immediately in the direction of that pocket of water. So we'll just build a quick little ladder down here that will give our duplicants access to that water that they can use. Oxygen's starting to become a bit of a challenge in here now on cycle 5. As we've expanded a little bit, the oxygen level has decreased as it's spread out through the base. You can see here on the overlay that the oxygen level here is now barely breathable instead of being in the breathable level. So we're ready to start to supplement the amount of air that we have here with some that we produce ourselves. We're also starting to see some carbon dioxide build up here that we're going to need to tackle so that doesn't start to spread out too much. But first we'll go into the oxygen, and we'll choose the algae deoxidizer, and we'll set this up, and it'll produce a decent amount of oxygen for us that will start to resupply the core portion of our base. We'll just set it up over here. This will also need to be connected to the power supply, but what it'll do is use the algae that we've collected and produce oxygen in that center of our base. And now down in the lower portion, we're starting to see some carbon dioxide. What the higher air pressure will do in the core portion of the base is help to drive the carbon dioxide down over into this lower area. So we're going to set algae terrariums down here to help convert some of that carbon dioxide that moves this way into breathable oxygen again. I also want to set up some batteries here so we can start to store some of the power that we're producing. So I'm going to build a separate little platform here that's, again, separated from the main area of the base simply because the batteries produce heat. So I'm kind of setting these out to the side. We'll put, I don't know, 4 or 5 in here. And then we'll later have to connect those to the power grid. And that'll let us start to store some of the power that we're producing from that manual generator so that when we're not running on it, we can still have some power to use the machines. Carbon dioxide's really been building up in the lower area of the base, and I'm also short on copper, so conveniently there's this pocket down here that has a vacuum in it. We're going to build a little ladder down here we can use to harvest the copper that's in place, so we can have the resources we need for that. Now, when we cut into this vacuum here, we're also going to draw some of the gases that are immediately next to the opening down into this lower area. So some of the carbon dioxide that we've had building up down here, that's been pushed by the algae deoxidizer by building pressure in the main part of the base, it's kind of squishing it down towards the lower right here. It's now cycle 6, and we have access to our next duplicant. We have Brady, who's a level 8, who has the Night Owl trait, but he's also a Loud Sleeper. The Loud Sleeper is probably one of the worst traits you can get, simply because it disturbs the rest of the other duplicants, and you have to keep them separated from the rest of the group. Similarly, Eugene is also a Loud Sleeper, and he's got a bombless stomach. We have Hassan, who's good in medicine, construction, and creativity, but he can't dig, but he is also an early riser. I'm going to take Hassan because his creativity trait will come in handy, and I have other duplicates that can do the digging for now. Our batteries are now built, so I'm going to create an electrical wire that's going to run from our generator over to the space where we have the batteries, and we'll connect each of those. When duplicants go to sleep, they're not producing power on the treadmill, so without the batteries, things like the algae deoxidizer simply stop working, and in some situations that could become a problem. Right now, we have a good concentration of breathable oxygen, so it's not an issue here, but it's better to start storing the power early. We're now at the point where we're running low on food. The planter boxes, although they've been constructed, are not yet ready to do any harvesting because we haven't planted the seeds yet. So to bridge that gap, I'm going to create a microbe musher. The microbe musher does consume water, so it's something that you don't want to use long term if you can avoid it. However, you may need to use it in a bridge situation such as this. It also produces heat, so it'll start to warm up your base, so it's not a good idea to run it long term. Once the microbe musher is ready and it's connected to the power supply, choose the mush bar, and set it on continuous fabricate for the moment so you don't have to pay constant attention to it. But be aware of your kilocalories. As this starts to build up, it's going to be very important that you go and turn it off so that you're not consuming excess water and creating unnecessary amounts of food. In your planter boxes, you want to go and select the mealwood seed and plant each of those. We have a total of 10 boxes, so it's convenient that we have 10 seeds available to us here. You can also plant blossoms. As it turns out, I was actually 2 mealwoods short, but I do have 2 blossoms, and this is another fruit that can be grown and produces 1,000 kilocalories of food. At present, the blossom is the only plant that requires fertilizer and is the only actual use for fertilizer. That may change as we move forward, as the game is still currently in alpha. We're on cycle 8 now, and as you can see, the duplicants are now showing the trait for the sore back because they've been sleeping on the ground, so it's kind of important to get the beds in place now to help ensure that stress levels don't rise too much. I'm going to place a total of 3 beds on each side. I'm going to leave a gap on each side as well for a little bit of space to have some decor that we can add in. We can build a potted plant on each side. We can do some pictures and things. That'll help it keep their stress low when they're in this area by ensuring that they're comfortable with their living space. When building this upper level, I left a gap between the floor and the ladder to help ensure that there's an opportunity for airflow, both for oxygen upward and for carbon dioxide to go downward. And for the moment, I'm going to leave a gap over here as well, although ultimately we'll end up closing in this space almost entirely. At this point, our gases are fairly well in control. We have good, strong oxygen supply in the area where they're going to be spending a lot of time, both doing research, running on the treadmill, and then when they're sleeping at night. Oxygen is not as strong over in this lower area, but it's not quite as important as long as we have sufficient pressure for the mealwood to grow. And our carbon dioxide has continued to flow down to the right, and that's located now largely in this area toward the bottom portion, although there is some at the lower floor. But with 2 algae terrariums in place, that helps to scrub that out. As you can see, our compost is now producing some contaminated oxygen, so in order to keep that away from the greater portion of the base, in the oxygen tab we can choose the air deodorizer and place that here as well, so that any contaminated oxygen that comes near it will get drawn in and cleaned out. This will convert it into breathable oxygen. Since our sanitation sciences research is completed, we can go back to the research station and choose our next research we want to complete. At this point, I would generally recommend going after something like gas piping, which will allow you to move gases around, but also, pretty importantly, gets you access to the gas-permeable tile. This lets you build a piece of flooring that will allow things like carbon dioxide to sink through and oxygen to rise through so that you can have a better flow of air movement within your base, and you don't create too many pockets where gases get trapped and become a problem. Cycle 9, and I'm now mostly working on base cleanup. I generally like to go to the ration box and set it for a priority of 6 so that any food that they produce will be picked up off the ground and placed in the ration box rather than being left to sit on the ground. They do also need to go around and pick up other materials and resources that are left. They'll generally do this task on their own. You don't have to choose to make them sweep unless you need to set it at a higher priority. But as they're working on things like other research, it's perfectly fine to just worry about cleaning things up. Our priority now is really going to be ensuring that we can get decent enough air pressure to our mealwood plants, which look like they're not getting enough air pressure to grow sufficiently. They're only at about 30% now. And the sooner we can move to a point where we're no longer using our microbe musher, which I'm now going to turn off since we're at 19,000 calories again. The sooner we can move away from that, the better it will be because we can conserve the water that we have. And in this particular location, we only have a couple small pockets of water to work with. Our gas piping research is completed, so now at this point, the research that you choose will ultimately be up to your own discretion. I don't know that there's any single priority that's best to select, although I do like to move towards having an air scrubber so that I don't have to have algae terrariums in place in order to deal with carbon dioxide. But you may want to move towards other power supplies or improving the decor. In this case, I'm going to choose the decor just to ensure that we're keeping our duplicants happy, and we make the rest of the base look a little nicer. Cycle 9, we're getting our 6th duplicant. This is generally the last duplicant that I'll choose early on in the game. I'll try to run with 6 duplicants for a while because it's easy to stabilize your food and other resources with a limited number of people. We have 2 loud sleepers again, which is a challenge. And then we have an anemic person who's creative and is good at construction, but is not terribly quick moving or particularly strong. In this case, because I don't have a separate bed set apart, I'm probably going to take Josie the architect. Even though they're anemic, they are an interior decorator. They're naturally robust, so they won't get sick very often, and they can help with construction and art projects. In Cycle 10 now, our base is largely stabilized. However, I am still having an issue with some carbon dioxide staying trapped right along my plant line, and that seems to be reducing the air pressurization at the plant level. Just above, you can see there's plenty of breathable air here that should provide sufficient enough pressure. But there's a low pressure skim of carbon dioxide hovering along the floor right here that's actually preventing the plants from growing properly because it's keeping them in a low pressure environment. So what I'm going to do to simplify this situation is I'm just going to add a quick little ladder here through the floor. Actually, this is going to cut us into some oxalates that'll even give us access to some more oxygen. But more importantly, this will give a place for the carbon dioxide to drop down that's lower than this area of the base, and it should start these plants growing properly again. We've completed more research, so I'm going to quickly set up some decor so that we have a little something for our duplicants to enjoy about their home. And I'm going to go into the jobs also and ensure that the people who are completing the art projects are only the ones that have artistic talents. It's the night of Cycle 10, and our base at this point is largely stabilized, and from here you can build it out any way that you want to. As you move forward, you'll be able to gather food from the mealwood. At this point, it's growing around 60%, so it'd be another day or two before that's ready to start harvesting and producing a steady supply of food. For a total of 6 duplicants, you may want to have a larger patch of mealwood than this. I would recommend continuing to expand out this area or building a second patch somewhere else so that you have a cycle going where when some of it is ready, other portions are growing, so you have a steady supply moving that way. Our carbon dioxide is well in control. As you can see, we have good breathable air throughout the greater portion of the base. We have a place for our carbon dioxide to pool that's lower than the living area. We have control of contaminated gases that might be coming from our compost at this point. We have batteries to help store power so that when we're not running on the treadmill, we can also still continue to use other items that draw on power. We've advanced well within our research. We have almost the entire bottom level of research completed at this point. We've already moved a little bit into the second level, and we can start expanding outward as you would choose as well. My next move at this point would probably be to move either into the power regulation just to complete that, or to move into percolation as I move towards advanced filtration, because I'd like to make use of the air scrubber early. And thus, the percolation will also give you access to the water purifier, which will help you clean contaminated water. At this point, you're not producing any contaminated water, so it's not a rush scenario. However, if you do start to use the sanitation and you go into plumbing and make use of the lavatory or the shower, both of which are good benefits for your duplicants, those will produce contaminated water, and that ability to clean that water is certainly helpful. So this has been how to stabilize your base within the first 10 cycles of the game. From here, you can advance out just about any direction that you want to, but this will give you a good base platform to work off of that gives you a place for your duplicants to sleep and keep the stress low. The decor is set up to keep the stress low. We've got food production, storage, power consumption, or power creation and storage. And then we also have a place for them to do their business. So thanks everyone for checking out the video. Hope you enjoy these and you'll come back and check out some more. If you did find this video helpful, then certainly just leave a comment down below to let me know. Otherwise, I'm CrypticFox. I'll see all of you next time.